Hi, welcome to the next chapter. We're going to be talking about echoing. So, what is echoing? Well, echoing is the reuse of existing elements across a canvas or design to guide the eye or simplify the amount of separate things the human mind must process. One way people implement this is called the rule of threes. The rule of threes I find interesting. It's my stipulation that 3 is the least amount needed to make a pattern, but not too many to be boring or even. Even amounts of things are often, well, too balanced, and as I said before, when stuff is imbalanced, then things are happening and we have movement. Try echoing things in threes. This rule can apply to more principles than echoing. In my mind, when I think of echoing and composition, I'm reminded of this image. I use them as stops as in Andrew Loomis's book, where he reuses the same value and type of element, a bush, as you can see here. You can echo things in many ways and with almost anything. A color, a shape, a pattern, a design element, anything. Don't only use this in composition. Here's a blown out, terrible image of my car. Why did I show you this? Well, the human mind recognizes things in patterns. Do you remember the last time that you bought a car? I bet you started seeing that model of vehicle all over once you bought it. We're prone to recognizing symbols and existing patterns. We seek out connections beneath our conscious mind. The rule of threes can be used when echoing elements, especially in composition, to great effect. We can use the elements to tell the viewer where to look or where not to look. Imagine if your car was put on each of these stops. Not only would you recognize them immediately, but you'd have your eye drawn right to it. Now use something from your painting and replace the cars. Then you've used echoing to guide the eye, and now we can do it in our designs and composition. It's that easy. Framing is another quick topic I would like to bring up that I decided I think is along the same line as echoing. So framing is basically reinforcing what exists, and usually more than likely it's line work. So that can be with forms, it can be with extra lines, it can be with thicker lines with different values. So framing is a quick way of echoing and strengthening a specific line. In design, I like to put a strong element down and try my best to reinforce that with other elements. Framing, I constantly use to make my line work not only stronger, but more interesting in a design. It can add finesse and detail to your image, making it more interesting without greatly adding any distracting details. If anything, it makes your design stronger. I also think of this like line weight in drawing. We make some lines thicker and some thinner for visual interest. 3D is no different. Change how you think. So now let's go forward and break down some examples so that we can get a better understanding of how to apply echoing. Alright, so let's talk about echoing and let's break down some places where I've used echoing in my workflow as well as other people in different applications ranging from real life to science fiction to painting. So in this gun, for example, some of the ways that I used echoing is I tried to use these details and make them all the same type or a similar type. And you'll notice that in a way I'm actually echoing this more because I reuse oftentimes on my smaller details very bright pieces of metal. But let's talk about just shape for now. So I reuse these 4 pieces of metal, and I guess you could call it even more than that. But let's just focus on these. So I've made a triangle with these intentionally. When I'm placing these, I'm thinking about the distance between them and their relationship to one another and where the eye is going. I wanted to use this one to bring attention to this this separation in the gun. I wanted to use this one to bring the eye towards the end of this receiver where I have all these details grouped. I wanted to place this a little bit farther away from these for better eye travel, but close enough to this detail group here. And then I placed this one far enough that the eye would get pushed to the back of the gun. So that's not the only way I use evenness in this design, echoing in this design. I tried to use a dark material for the front and the back, so that way, and also the toe. You'll notice that I like to use echoing elements on the extremities of things to guide the eye to the edges of something. It's very important that we don't get caught up in the center of a design. Another thing that I echoed these designs. I could have chose to make 2 or 4 different latches, but I decided to go with something simple and then reuse a rectangular element here, just for simplicity's sake, but adding detail. I could have used a circle or some other element, but most of my details are pretty much rectangular bright boxes at this point. So I didn't want to break that unless it was for a certain purpose, like these unique details. So you can see I'm also using that same rectangular box element here, but in a different way. I'm using it to flank this Garuda logo. And not only am I doing that, I'm making it a bit balanced, so that way the eye isn't actually being guided forward. I reuse them here instead of having different types of details in no specific pattern, just because it's a quick, easy detail. But so I also reused the selector switches, implying that they both do something different from the gun, but they're connected and interactive. So that's a few ways that I use echoing in this design. Let's go over to my croc gun. Let's break this guy down a little bit. Let me hide this layer really quick. So in this gun, I echo a lot of things, but I'll talk about some of the most simple ones. So I tried to reuse this idea of the bands, these metal bands, 3 times, so that the eye would have a mental connection and see them here and then see it here. Again, you'll notice the pattern with the extremities of things. You know, we're not trying to get the eye stuck in a composition. I echoed the latches so that functionally you'd think, oh, they're connected. Like if I undo this latch, this assembly will come off on the front. If I undo this latch, it'll remove the top of the gun. So those are 2 like functional elements I echoed, but I also echoed some shapes and visual elements. For example, I echoed this curve very intentionally to help guide the eye forward. And not only that, I thought it was interesting when they opposed each other and when you rotate around the gun. So I also can echo color, and I do it intentionally on this trigger. Not only am I doing this because functional areas are very important to have that's usually where you put color. But it also guides the eye. I mean, like this yellow is strong, and so I want to make sure I'm not wasting the canvas and the eye gets thrown to the back of the gun somehow. Alright, so for our next example, I wanted to talk about echoing and creating shapes. So I already did this paint over, but basically I used echoing with hierarchy and with also a counter angle, and with the idea of trying to create simple shapes with repeating elements. So I reused this capsule shape with the lights on the front, on the top, in a large shape, and then medium ones on the side, and then a small light echoing that light in the middle. I'm trying to have primary, secondary, tertiary. I also echoed the horizontal yellow things on the mech in a counter angle intentionally because I wanted it to oppose the more positive triangle that's pushing upwards. So that's how I used echoing in this design. One more thing that I think is also super important on this croc gun, and that is an example of something I saw a lot of students and people failing at when I was teaching. I had a lot of people making sci-fi guns, and the most common thing that I saw was people will make circular designs. It's one thing to make like, a different design, but circles need lots of reinforcement to feel good, generally. The bigger they are, the more that they need to be echoed and framed and reinforced. Other shapes you can get away with a little bit less because it's more angular, right? But circles are very important to frame. You can see I have multiple layers of circular elements framing this circle. I echo it on the surrounding parts, and I make sure that this whole idea is continuous. If I didn't do this, it would be singled out and look super weak and pretty useless. So it's super important that we frame, we reinforce with repeated line work important things, such as this, with form changes, with details, with whatever is necessary to make it look like it belongs. So here's an alien that I made, and let's bring this into a different context than guns. So on this alien, I tried to reuse certain elements. I guess we can't use a red marker on this guy. All right, let's do a green. Big fat green marker. So I tried to reuse these flat planes with details, and then all I did was change how they connected and their size. So for example, I have the large, and then I have the medium shape. By doing this instead of having two designs, it makes it a lot more easy to read and simple. I used a similar type of design as well for how they connected, so that way the eye would, know how to interact with it. Also, or wouldn't find it complicated, and it would find the visual connection, I should say. Also, I tried to make sure that a lot of the lines that surround this echo the existing lines. Let me draw over that so it's a little bit easier to see. So for example, this line is echoing this line. This line is echoing this line. This line is echoing this line and this line. I try to not make things random, and I try to make sure that I'm echoing different lines in my design. I don't want them to feel weak. So this is just one place that I echoed. Another place that I've echoed in this design is with the spiky things on the back. So I tried to make a detail at the end and a long strip for each of them. And then I also tried to echo circles throughout the design to try and make it just a little bit more consistent. But you'll notice, like before, I talked about hierarchy. Big, medium, small. It's purposeful. And on the back, I tried to echo the exact same design I had on the, I tried to echo the same thing that I had on the front, which is, the same type of detail. So I tried to make sure that all of these pieces, are echoed and pretty clear and connected. I tried to use framing and different types of lines and form changes to make this single line down the back much more strong and prominent and have depth. So yeah, you can see here, this is a quick drawing of where those echoes were in my block out though. So I was thinking about this from the very beginning of the design. So we've talked about it in characters and weapons. Let's quickly talk about it in the context of composition. So Sparth said that I could use his paintings in this tutorial, so I'm going to use them because I think that they have amazing examples. So this one's pretty obvious, and you can see the rule of threes here. You can see that there's clearly, three things being echoed pretty strongly. There is a fourth, but it's very tiny. And so using the rule of threes is very helpful because you don't want it to be too many, and you don't want it to be too little. So here you can see that Sparth is using red spaceships to guide the eye. And his positioning and other things about it we'll talk about later. But for now, let's just talk about echoing. You can see that two certain types of shapes, like long rectangles, are also being echoed and used. He echoes certain, more rounded and curved shapes as well. So there's a lot of places that we can use echoing and reasons. You can see, though, how Sparth is using these red ships exactly how Andrew Loomis is using his stops in his images. So I highly suggest go look at people's art. Go look for this in the real world. And before we end this video, I'm going to have 1 to 2 more examples. But I suggest go looking for that in art, and you'll start to see the patterns and things, and eventually you'll be able to reproduce them yourselves. So here's another example of echoing on this product design. I have a floating plant pot in my room, and I noticed that basically what they did, and how I would have thought about it at least, is they used the bottom circle to echo and ground in space the positioning of this circular element. And then they also used the choice, which they didn't have to do, of a circular base. It's a very echoing piece. Like almost every part of it is echoed. It's very concentric and strong, I think. I don't have an example of this, unfortunately, but I'd suggest you, if you want to see echoing in this way specifically, where you use a different element to solidify something in space, go to your grocery store. And if they have like an electronics section, you'll notice that they probably have a roof or a ceiling around it, which segments off and echoes the floor plan of that space. They might do this at a deli, different departments. You'd be surprised how this is used in architecture and lots of different ways to set space aside. I'm going to talk about a grocery store in a different chapter, but go look for this for yourself and go try and find it in the real world. So before we end this chapter or these breakdowns, let's talk about one last thing, And I just want to show a few examples of framing. So here's one example I took this picture. And so basically let's look at the lines for this main thing. So we have this line, and these are pretty strong lines. And then we have this shape too. We have this shape. And so one thing that we're going to notice that cars have a lot of is echoing existing lines with framing. These can be form changes like here. So we have this line right here. You can see that this line is echoed and it has a form change. So now all of a sudden the line weight went from this small weak little line to this thick reinforced line that's dynamic, and it gets from big to small. It's very interesting. The line that outlines the headlight, is helping to reinforce the overall line, and then so is the line on the hood here, because it's echoing this line. They also use form to echo and reinforce this front vent. So this is another way that we use echoing, and you can use this in sci-fi all day. Super, super useful in hard surface. So in this way, you can see here, I used a form change to echo the main line work of the gun. So why does it matter? Well, you notice that it adds a dark value. I instantly strengthen that line greatly. If we look a little bit closer, you'll notice that I'm using small form changes all across these lines, and even in some cases big objects that follow that line, to reinforce and bring purpose to it. I try to have a bunch of layers almost always, and sometimes different patterns and breakups, but I find that it can help make things much more interesting. So hopefully these breakdowns helped, and it helps you understand grouping a little bit better. Let's get into the next chapter, and I'll see you guys there.